Hi everyone, my name is Cassandra Berlin and today I'm here to talk with you about advanced argumentation on human nature. And in this lecture, I'm going to talk a little bit about our biology, and then I'm going to move into how our societies were originally developed and how that can change a little bit as we take on some of these motions. This lecture was very much inspired by the book Sapiens. I have it right here for you. A brief history of humankind. It's written by Yuval Noah Harari, and it is an excellent read. If I were to recommend one single book to any debater in world schools, it would be this one. This one, or maybe Prisoners of Geography, which was a great read that was recommended to us for Team USA last year. Anyway, a little bit about me to start. I use the pronouns she, her generally, but they, them is always fine. If you're curious about my experience, I have a little bit written about it right there. I'd like to highlight two things. After winning NSDA Nationals and World Schools with my district team, I was selected to compete with Team USA, and it was a wonderful experience, and I'm really happy to be back here at GDS, although virtually and asynchronously, to teach a little bit. After COVID, I chose to take a gap year since I didn't think that the online education part was for me. I worked a little bit in food service. I picked up this book and Harari amazed me, so I wanted to share it with you. I have 3 kittens. On the left here, you see my baby Feta. And then on the right, there is a smiley shot of me and Liana in the sunny gardens by the bay in Singapore. And right in the middle, a little dual terrarium that I made one day in quarantine. But let's get started with the meat of the lecture. I'll start off with a little bit of an outline if you're curious about what we're here to talk about today. We are going to first address human uniqueness. So if any of you remember the big questions topic from maybe 3 years ago, there was, are humans really different? And I think that we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Some part about evolution, and then we'll have a drill before I teach you a little bit about the agricultural revolution material. And then there'll be a little summary at the end of the lecture. But today I hope to leave you with perhaps a little bit better of an answer to the two questions on the left. How has evolution left human development? And then how do our chosen societies inform our actions and practices? So first, a little bit about human uniqueness. In the book, Harari actually likens biology to a sports field that makes competition possible. So what happens with biology, we can explain it in a way that our biology is what makes our interactions possible. And he's known for saying something also pretty similar where nothing is unnatural unless it's impossible. The meaning of this is that oftentimes we can characterize certain practices as unnatural, but as long as they exist within the realm of biology, then technically they follow the laws of nature, which is a pretty interesting thought to start out with, in my opinion. But in terms of human biology that has made our dominance as a species possible, one of the leading theories is that brain size. It's worth noting that brain size and our increased brain size from other creatures comes with a direct trade-off of other traits and other possibilities that are generally positive for evolution. So we got our brains from our biceps. If you look back to chimpanzees and other sapiens, often other sapiens are found with bigger arms and just generally more muscular figures, which makes them more capable against us, modern day humans, to fight against nature, to fight against our everything before. But somewhere between then and now, there existed a benefit of a brain. And because we were able to adapt and change so quickly our brain, we have an increased brain size. And there's a theory about that one as well. Some say that we can't explain why human brain size just exploded over a period of about 200,000 years. And there is a theory that psychedelics played a role, and that's something to look into more if you're interested. But originally humans, much like a woodpecker has their beak and is able to extract insects from wood, our original niche our original ability, we were able to craft tools to get bone marrow. And we did that because we couldn't fight against the lions and tigers that would kill the large animals. But if we could get inside the bone, there was this super healthy, now it's even a superfood, I think, idea of bone marrow. And we could extract it, and that was what made humans something. And it's possible that if we evolved our thumbs in order to better extract the bone marrow, then that's some way to say how we began being so creative with our hands, which is another thing that makes humans unique. Another idea about this brain is that there's a theory that says our brain size corresponds with this imaginative reality. So humans are the only known animal to be able to imagine things that have never existed. So the green monkey, if they're in a tree and they see a banana or a banana on the floor and a monkey is running to the banana, a green monkey could say, "Watch out, a lion." So one monkey scurries away and then the banana is left to the other monkey. They're known to do that. But humans are unique because we are the only known species to have created a type of religion and spirituality in ways that we can't see. So all monkeys before, or in order for that scenario to work, both monkeys would have had to see a lion for it to be possible. But the idea that humans have created things that we have never seen and concepts that are unknown to our existence is what makes us unique. And yeah, you can say about how religion has shaped that. But another modern day example is the creation of a limited liability company. So the idea of a LLC is that one person creates a company so that the company is held liable for damages as opposed to the individual. It helps to increase investment. It's an idea that people came up with for a purpose, for that goal of increasing investment. It's not something that's really there. It really is just a separation. And that creation and the idea that people buy it, people believe it, is a big idea when you're talking about human nature and how we can evolve and change and our societies move so quickly. So right here on the right, we have one more thing that humans got right, and that was the ability to control a singular element. So a crow can look down and see a tornado or certain tunnels of air and know which parts to avoid or which parts to use in order to perfect their wings and fly better. This is optimization of environment, but humans are the most capable creatures of really changing that environment to our advantage. One of the examples here is fire. So we could light a forest on fire, which would leave us with a cleared ground, a safe space that generally didn't create any predators, but also cooked food that was available for ready consumption. And the cooked food uniquely cut down on our chewing time so much that it allowed us to do other things, to find other foods, to build tools, to create communities. And that's important as well. So a little bit moving on from about 2000 years ago, I'd like to talk about our hunter-gatherer history. So in the motion, this house regrets the glorification of violence in popular culture, a motion I debated in Singapore in 2020. There was a response from a judge that I had, whose name I cannot remember, but he asked us, are humans biologically ingrained to be violent? Are we lacking a certain violence that is necessary? Or are we biologically have too much of this tendency towards violence, and it's more important to minimize it? And the reason why is because our team in that lecture or in that debate focused very much on socialization of violence, because that's what the motion asks us to question. How does popular culture form this violence? But if you can work into that argument why we need either an excess or less violence involved in popular culture, then based on how are humans originally born to be, then you're going to be more successful in that argumentation when you're trying to say that we need less violence. And that argument would work on any side. There are ways to say humans are born nonviolent, and there are also ways to say that humans are born violent. So if you can come up with warrants on those areas, it's super helpful. But on this area, you can think about violence as domination and violence as competition, because the idea that you have to do better than somebody else in order to procreate is pretty crucial. But one reason why we can say that humans became so dominant is because we worked to maintain larger groups. So in our hunter-gatherer history, we were initially in bands of about 50 groups that occasionally got up to the 150s. And in a single 50-person group, there are 1,225 individual relationships, which means that humans were animals that were entirely set on using gossip and communication and language for the purpose of furthering their own benefit. And the reason why that's interesting is because it allowed us to develop language that could lead to other opportunities. So you can develop language, yes, to gossip and say, who is your next door neighbor, who's good at this task, and that's very practical. But that same language that we developed in order to talk about the necessities was also the language that we've used to maintain relationships. And the idea that gossip has been such a large part of our history is something that you can most certainly work into argumentation. But after that language was developed, this idea that I just talked about previously, the one where we have larger brains so we can imagine things that do not exist, there is also the possibility of mobilizing large groups. So if you put 200,000 chimpanzees in a city, they would have no idea what to do. There's no history of creatures as many as we are working all under the same system. Generally, the bands are much smaller. And the reason why that has been possible is because of two things. Specialization. So one human can get really good at their specific job, profession, hobby, whatever, and then everybody else can perform other tasks. There's less need for specialization when you have a smaller group. You have to be more versatile, which is one of the reasons why some say that our hunter-gatherer ancestors were among the smartest people to ever exist, because their knowledge had to be so incredible. Aside from that, the second reason why is because the larger cooperative strategy for survival is dependent upon understanding a larger purpose. So if you can create a nation and say we work for this nation, or you can create a religion to say this is the service of the religion, then you can have large groups of people all working under a similar guise. And that leads to rapidly changing social behaviors because of that united language, and because you're able to communicate in those large groups. And large groups of people, as opposed to a 50-member group, ideas spread quickly, which means that there is a huge opportunity for rapid evolution and societal change in a short period of time that has also contributed to why humans are very dominant in today's society. So before we do a drill, you're welcome to take a quick water or a quick stretch break. I'm just going to read this quote to you. It's from the book. "We did not domesticate wheat, it domesticated us." I think this is an interesting thought to leave you with before I introduce the drill for today, where I'm going to have you talk about the agricultural revolution. It's worth noting here that the agricultural revolution I'm referring to here is the Neolithic to agricultural revolution, and not the agricultural revolution in Europe in the mid 17th to early 18th century. We're talking about how hunter-gatherers went to agricultural. So form groups of 3 to 5, and then do your impromptu prep with the share out on the motion, and please submit to the tiny URL. I have 2 questions there to guide your thinking. You're welcome to pause. All right, we're back. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the agricultural revolution, and I'm hoping that a lot of the argumentation that you had in your early stuff, we can supplement with this information as well. So think about the agricultural revolution and its effect on quality of life. I say quality of life because oftentimes in debate, we are taught to evaluate impacts on lives lost. But I also think it's very much always when you're talking about lives lost, thinking about how are we not just improving the number of people who can survive or who can procreate, et cetera. We're also talking about how happy those people are and different ways to evaluate the quality of life. So in talking about the quality of life, it's a larger branch than just the simplistic who has food, right? There are more parts about quality of life than are you capable enough of surviving? And this is a big idea in evolution too, and part of why sometimes people say that evolutionary thinking can be flawed because yes, you survived, but did you thrive? And that's another question that you can use to respond to types of evolutionary argumentation if they're presented to you. But on social change, the agricultural revolution went from nomads to dwellers. So people who had their residence generally seem to be a little bit less interactive during their working hours, which led to fewer talks about working and more talks about socialization, which has contributed to other types of likely academic thinking, as opposed to thinking based on the elements. There's also huge changes in generational structures because now that people are living places, you're a farmer who takes care of things year to year. And if you don't plant in the spring, there won't be food to harvest in the fall. So you're a planner. That also means you're likely to plan what happens if you are no longer to be there. And with larger families that were both, yes, they needed more food in order to survive, but they also provided a bunch of hands to work in the field. That also became an additional question. So if you're thinking onto, let's say, emotion about inequality, and the original roots of income inequality and generational inequality, you can even think back to how we initially acquired properties and what that looked like. Another idea is on health, and the idea that we had worked previously as hunter-gatherers for about 45 hours a week, and it was always with a partner. You almost always went somewhere with your band. But instead, when humans began farming, we worked longer, harder hours consistently, and we had a dependent diet upon many of the staple foods, which contributed to a whole bunch of diseases and injury. And one fact is that a third of kids died before 20. And that's something that you can think about when you're moving from an undeveloped area to trying to develop agriculture. And this principle applies, yes, as humans generally, and you can relate the initial agricultural revolution, but you can also think about this principle as any time that you're talking about trying to introduce farming, moving to a different structure or a different societal structure that changes the core part of it. So modern impacts of the agricultural revolution was this acceptance with having a whole bunch of kids. And we became very dependent upon materials as individuals. So a family would have more stuff than nomads would have in a 50-person group, which made us very intent on land ownership because you had to have a place to keep that stuff and you weren't going to be moving around. That changed the future planning mindset and generational wealth. And we talked about the income equality point. Another idea here is once people were living in their own quarters or within their own families, there was more privacy because nomadic people very much did not engage in private matters. Everything was almost done together, or at the very least talked about as best we know. And the agricultural revolution and idea of land and your own space and your own property created this idea of privacy, which is another interesting question. As well with, what if my family's fine? Do I really want to help your neighbor? Which was not the mindset of people in a group of 50 who really depended on each other for the main tasks. You seem to have more stake in the smaller group. So this leads me to a little evolutionary question, to which I'm not going to give you an answer because we don't really know one. It's about Göbekli Tepe, which was constructed in about 9500 BCE. So we went from gathering to farming between 1900 or that year, 9500 BCE, and about 8500 BCE. And this was found pretty recently and dated recently enough. But the question is, there were thousands of people required to build these temples. And there was no significant known introduction of religion at that point, or organized religion in large groups. It was all very small. But this is the largest early cooperative example of a group getting together to build something. So the question was, since this was an area very near where all of the first farming existed, was, did people choose farming because they wanted to build this temple and that was their everything, and they built their culture around it because they needed to help build this temple, and if you lived near it you could, and then if you we had enough farming to feed everybody, or was the farming all there and that sprung up and it was a nice place to farm, and then everybody decided that they would build the temple because they were close enough. And that is the idea of debate, right? So on an emotion that pertains to anything such as this one, you could argue either side. You could say that the wheat came first or that the workers came first. And the truth is we don't know. So if you'd like to take a mini drill, you can do a 1-minute brainstorm on which you thought came first and why, using a little bit of the argumentation we've learned. You can pause. But we have, before that, or after that, a bit more on the imagined order. So once you have an imagined reality, this idea that people can believe in things they don't see, other individuals say, well, what if they could believe in what I create? So that leads to different types of organizational structures that can be used for different purposes. Ones that we know are all listed here: religion, democracy, both the idea of a nation and the idea of laws to follow, and capitalism is one that you could talk about as well. To the right, I've highlighted one of my favorites. This is a Hammurabi pillar, and I'm sure that you're familiar with one of the first creations of laws. But there are a couple things to note here. One of the ideas is that Hammurabi was gifted these codes from a god, or these codes from a god, pardon me, the quotes are wrong. And there's an argument that it was a propaganda device used by him in order to get people to follow these laws. So any types of our orders, those organizational structures that we can talk about, it's worth questioning, why were they created, under what purpose, and with what ability? So when you're talking about any of those are all questions that you can ponder and work back to our previous history and our previous biology, to think about how we have broadly accepted ideas that have some degree of links to material worlds, but they also shape desires. And the definition of those imagined orders is created with those ideas. And if it falls under one of those categories and you are able to successfully call out this order as an imagined one, then it's really interesting the type of debate work that you're able to do, to almost reject those ideas or to really buy into them and say, this is a structure that we have created. Here are its capabilities, and here's how we can improve X, Y, and Z. And that's the core of what debate's about, in my personal opinion. Little summary before the end. So remember, biology is the realm and everything else happens in the realm of biology because it makes it all possible. Humans have a special imagination that has led to our dominance because of large cooperation. The agricultural revolution likely decreased the quality of life for people, but it made more people, and it made more people that formed larger groups. And that's crucial to understand. And then the idea of religion and organized structure, as we just talked about, allowed us the opportunity to invent what a government can look like, and the idea of a governing body, which is also pretty crucial. If anyone is interested in doing extras, these are a couple of examples. The Black, Blue, and Red Lab, I would love for you to talk about technological advancement and the quality of life using some of the argumentation structures as practiced in the lecture. This is a good drill because I'm not asking you to repeat the information that you just learned. I'm sure you'd be great at that. But I want you to apply what you just learned and the questions that we have thought about changing quality of life to a different type of argument. And that's a way that you can use what I've said about the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago into a very modern day concept that you might be more likely to find in motion. And if you're really looking to go above and beyond, there's an outline that you can prepare and say why the agricultural revolution that we did talk about was really so great, the Neolithic revolution. And you're welcome to submit any additional drills that you do to the tiny URL as well. Enjoy.